Hello, my name is Jennifer O'Connell and I'm the Senior Painting Conservator at the Tasmania Museum and Art Gallery. I'm located in Hobart and I pay respect to the original owners of the land, the Muwinina people, who did not survive British colonisation. I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, the continuing custodians of Lutruwita. I'm going to speak today about a painting condition survey that I've been undertaking at TMAG. Upon starting my role at TMAG in 2018, I decided to undertake a condition survey of the painting collection. To me, this was a way to familiarise myself with the painting collection. The goal of the survey is to ascertain the overall condition of the collection by assigning condition rankings, and then to formulate a work plan based on conservation needs. 80% of my role is based around the loans and exhibition program, so this survey fits into that other 20%. In order to justify the survey, I had to make it into a project. So the problem statement that I came up with was that we do not have an up-to-date conservation assessment of all paintings in the collection, and the project goal was to complete the condition survey of the TMAG painting collection. The painting collection ranges from the early 1800s through to the present day and includes notable artists such as John Glover, Benjamin Dutero and W.C. Piggany. The 20th century Tasmanian collection includes artists such as Dorothy Stoner and Edith Holmes, and TMAG is actively collecting present-day artists such as Michelle Boulter, Philip Wolfhagen and David Keeling. TMAG object stores are located over 4 different sites. So part of the painting collection is located in the city where the Museum and Art Gallery is, and also the Painting Conservation Lab. And then the rest of the painting collection is located in Rosny, and that happens to be where the Paper Conservation Lab is. The Object Conservation Lab is in Moona, and then the Herbarium is located at UTAS at Sandy Bay. Within the city site and the Rosny site, the paintings are located in the art stores, in the galleries, and there are a selection of paintings in Customs House outside the Director's office. So these were the major locations where I needed to do the painting survey. The detailed goals of the survey are to view each painting, so to cite every single painting. I decided not to do a sample, but to do a full survey, and then to assign each painting with a condition ranking from 1 to 4, to audit its location, so just to check that the location on the database is correct, to determine its vulnerability, and to determine treatment priorities. So from the results of the survey would feed into my work plan. To assess the paintings for glazing, so would the frame be able to hold acrylic? Is it framed? Is that viable? And also to check for any rehousing needs, for instance, the backing board or suitable hanging devices. In the case of paintings that are framed, I decided to include the frames in the condition survey. TMAG does have a collection of unregistered frames, however, and luckily Lisa Charleston, our conservation technician, has a lot of experience with frames and is very interested in them, and concurrently is doing a frame survey. And she's auditing that collection and collecting all of the data needed so that then the curators can make decisions about whether or not to register those frames into the collection. The TMAG collection database is in FileMaker Pro, and this is a screenshot of the Art Gallery database. So as you can see in the red box, there are 2 fields for conservation. They're both free text fields, so they do vary. People have put in condition notes such as good or fair, but there's no date assigned to that note, and it's not clear who put it in, if it was the conservator or someone else doing the data entry. So I haven't found those fields very useful. They're just those two there. And I tend to use the condition reports that are saved on our server or in hard copy rather than relying on the database. The conservation fields were also not going to be appropriate for the condition survey, so I worked with Clifford Davey at TMAG, and he created this conservation painting survey database for me that works with the Art Gallery database. So on here I can record a condition rating and also record major damage, and this form is based on our short condition report that we use, so it's compatible with that as well. To save time, we made it into a checklist, and we made sure that the registration information is pulled from the Art Gallery database. At the time that I was working on putting together the survey, Joel Taylor, who was working at the Getty Conservation Institute at the time, visited TMAG, and we had a chat about his research into collection condition survey data and some of the problems with survey data and not being consistent. So I put in a few processes to try and mitigate that, but also to make sure that I had some outcomes that were worthwhile. And these were the recommendations and follow-up section. And so that even if in the end the data is inconsistent or not relevant, I definitely have a positive outcome of knowing the number of paintings that require rehousing or that require treatment. I also included a tick box there for significant frame. So at the moment on our Art Gallery database, there's not a lot of information about the frames, or it's not consistent. And Lisa, who's working on the frame survey, asked if I could include this, and then she can use that information for her survey too. Another point I'd like to make is that I'm able to give a condition ranking to each section of the painting. So I have the overall condition, but then I can also give a ranking to the media support, auxiliary support, etc. Clifford originally put together a formula so that each of these rankings would calculate to give the overall condition, but I asked him to take that out so that I could override and make a decision on what I thought was the overall condition. And that'll make more sense in terms of the definition of 1 to 4. I drew on Jonathan Ashley Smith's risk assessment for object conservation for the definition of damage, and used a system of 1 through to 4, where 1 is good, 2 is fair, 3 is poor, and 4 is unacceptable, and where 1 and 2 denote that the artwork is stable, and 3 and 4 that it is unstable. As you saw on the survey form, if any element of the artwork or frame was unstable, then I would have given the overall condition as a 3 or 4, just so that I was aware of how many unstable works are in the collection. The survey is currently ongoing. However, at this point in time, the results are that 25% are in good condition, 58% in fair condition, 15% in poor, and 2% in unacceptable. So that was probably to be expected. I'm quite relieved that the largest proportion is in the stable category, and it is consistent with my assessments prior to loan and exhibition that almost 75% of the works do need some treatment. I am approaching the survey from an interventive perspective as well. So a preventive conservator may be looking at the painting slightly differently, but I'm looking for what treatment do I need to do. And so my decision-making matrix, my first question is, can the work be put on exhibition? Yes, so it goes to category 1. No, can the work be safely stored? Yes, then it would be category 2. No, is it causing damage to other works? No, you can go to category 3, and yes, category 4. So when I say causing damage to other works, I was thinking of something like mould, and actually put a field for mould, and that's probably because I moved from Sydney to Hobart, and I can tell you there hasn't been any mould in the collection, so I could probably take that out now. And I'm using category 4, especially if, say, the fit isn't very good. So if the framing is slightly unstable, that could be dangerous in the store. There are a few survey limitations. One is to do with the photography. I'm not able to store photos on the FileMaker database, and our storage is limited on our server, so I decided not to take photographs as I went through of the collection. I also thought the quality might be quite poor. For instance, this photograph in the slide is of a Paul Bowen painting with perspex, and the reflection means you can't actually see the painting. Another limitation is setting up lights in the store, so I'm able to use a torch and a head lamp for visual examination and raking light. However, I don't have any UV lamps, so I'm not looking for overpaint or varnish under UV. One aspect I did talk about with the registration team with recording dimensions. So the dimensions in the database are a little unreliable, and it seemed like a good time to perhaps take some measurements. However, I'm not unframing the work, so it would have only been the outside dimensions, and I thought this didn't really serve the overall goal of looking at every painting and assessing the condition, although it would have been a good addition to our information. I'll take you through some examples from the survey and the condition rankings that I gave them. So this is a painting by C.W. Pittard, and I gave it a ranking number 1 for good condition. It's ready to go on display in the gallery. It didn't require any treatment or rehousing, and it does have drying cracks which are slightly disfiguring, but they have been treated in the past. Here is a painting that is fair, so it's number 2. The media is stable, it has accretions, so it needs to be cleaned, and the frame itself has some losses, but the frame still looks stable, so that's why it's number 2. So it requires work before it can go on display, but it's stable. Here's a painting by Pigony, and it has paint losses, and this one I've put into category 3 as poor because the paint layer is unstable. So although it doesn't look a lot worse than the painting number 2, I know that this painting requires treatment, and I would consider the paint losses and the lifting paint as making it unstable. Here's a painting by a Scottish artist, and this is one of the few that has received the number 4 ranking. So it has a lot of active flaking paint, and also the frame isn't well fitted. So for those reasons, I I've given it the unacceptable ranking. It also needs rehousing, so it's nailed in, and it doesn't have a backing board. So there are a few contributing factors there. We have an Arthur Streeton painting. Streeton visited Hobart and did a number of paintings in Tasmania, and this painting is slightly too small for the frame, so we can see the gap there between the canvas and the frame, and we have permission from the curator to make a slip to better house that painting. We have a number of paintings on long-term loan, and this is at Government House, and just another example of a painting that needs a backboard. And you can also see the clips that are holding the canvas in place. We tend to use offset clips now, so something like that, we'd change something like that and put the labels on the file and put copies on the back of the backboard. Throughout the survey, I do try to have a look at the backs of the paintings. If there's a backing board, I don't remove it, so in that case I may not take it off its rack. But in cases like this Jack Garrington Smith painting of Hester Clark has also a beautiful painting on the verso of the canvas. While doing the survey, I've picked up on a few registration errors. So these two paintings both had the same label by accident, and I picked that up because when I went to do the condition survey on the second painting, the database told me I'd already done the survey. So I worked with Paul Westbury here, who's our registration officer, to work out what happened, and he worked out that two paintings had the same label. So it's probably rare because they just happen to both be portraits in gilded frames and oil paintings. But these are issues that we can resolve as we go, which is great. The survey is progressing quite well. There have been some major interruptions. So a salon hang in one of our permanent galleries called This Too Shall Pass involved a lot of treatment and condition reporting to hang these paintings, some of which have never been exhibited before. We also had a major David Keeling retrospective, which was predominantly loans from private lenders and involved a lot of condition reporting. The other disruption, of course, is COVID, and I worked part-time from home to enable social distancing in the lab. And so at the moment we're back at TMAG full-time, and I'm finding time to continue the survey. Undertaking the condition survey has certainly met some of those desired outcomes that I outlined in the project plan, and there have been some unexpected outcomes too. So the work I've done has really informed the work that I'm doing on the policy working group at TMAG. We're assessing every single policy that we have and comparing it to Spectrum, which is the UK Museum Collections Management Standard. This is in preparation for a very exciting move to a new collection management system. This system will be web-based and have photographs and modules for condition reporting. So all the work that I've been doing on the survey has helped me prepare for the new CMS because I've been on the testing committee. Another outcome is just the reduced risk of dissociation in the collection. So just upgrading those labels when we need to, checking off locations. We do have staff who do regular location audits, but I think looking through the paintings one by one is an excellent way to do an audit as well. I'm currently continuing with the painting condition survey on the FileMaker Pro, next year when the new CMS is available, I will transfer over to that, and I might be able to start uploading photographs at that point because the new CMS allows for that. I'm also continuing with clearing the art store. So you can see in this photograph there are sculptures in front of a painting rack, and just working on these kind of long-term storage issues along with the other conservators. And doing the survey really brings these to the forefront. Another task that I'm currently working on is putting together a report of at-risk collections, and the obvious ones are plastics or audio-visual materials, but I am keeping an eye out for items in the painting collection that I might need to include, for instance paintings with fluorescent paint that might be subject to fading faster than other media, and paintings that aren't housed correctly, for instance panel paintings that might not have room to move. So the painting condition survey really allows the time and space to be thinking about those other elements while I'm working on it. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope it's been of interest. I also want to thank AICCM and the Painting Special Interest Group, especially Ray and Raymonda, for putting together these papers. It's great to meet virtually. Please don't hesitate to send me an email if there's anything you'd like to follow up about the survey. Okay, thank you. Bye.
This presentation is from the Australian War Memorial in Canberra about our remarkably Australian-made paintings collection. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Ngunnawal land on which we work and live, and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. I'm Alana, the Senior Paintings Conservator, and I'll be taking you through background to the collection and focusing on paintings from the First and Second World Wars. My fellow Paintings Conservator Janet will focus on those relating to conflicts post-1945 to today, and Elise, Curator of Art, will finish our presentation by briefly discussing several recent acquisitions and commissions. The Australian War Memorial's national collection of objects, artworks, photographic, film, sound and extensive archive is an important means by which the stories of Australians are presented in order to help us to achieve our mission to remember, interpret and understand the Australian experience of war and its enduring impact on Australian society. This collection is better known within the wider public for its military, heraldry and technology objects, but particularly in this audience, some are also aware of the significant art collection, with many an emerging conservation student or graduate spending time in the paintings lab out at Mitchell over the years. The art collection of the memorial consists of over 40,000 artworks, the vast majority being works on paper, including sketches, watercolours, prints and posters. But due to limited time in this audience, we will be giving an overview of the paintings only, those that are on supports other than paper. The collection is comprised of just over 3,500 paintings and is a young collection, predominantly from the 20th century onwards. The Australian War Memorial operates the official war art scheme, one of the longest-running art commissioning programs in Australia since colonisation. Based on similar models in Britain and Canada, by immersing artists in the war effort, it had the purpose of creating a personal and informed representation of that conflict. It allows consideration of the visual and sensory dimension of war that is often missing from written histories or other records. Over 2,200 paintings, almost two-thirds of the collection, have been acquired as part of this scheme since its inception in 1917 during the First World War, with the remainder being comprised fairly evenly with separate commissions made outside the scheme to produce specific works of art such as portraits or the depiction of significant events, and the rest acquired as purchases and donations. You can see from this that 3/4 of the paintings in the collection were always destined for and under the memorial's care, so the collection for the most part is in good condition, and understandably it is generally the donations and purchases which bring the most complex treatments. It is an essentially Australian-made collection, but only 40% of the paintings were actually painted in Australia, with almost 60% painted by an Australian artist overseas, in some cases quite literally over the sea. Less than 2% of the paintings collection fall into neither of these categories. Predating the official war art scheme, the earliest painting in the collection is by English-born Arthur Collingridge, painted in Sydney in 1885, but purchased by the Memorial 80 years later as the scene depicted an important moment. The dispatch of a small New South Wales military contingent to the Sudan War marked the first time one of the British Australian colonies had raised, equipped and funded a force of full-time soldiers to fight overseas in a war. The most notable of the less than a dozen paintings from this colonial period are 3 Tom Roberts, including this pair of portraits which had been privately commissioned in 1896 and acquired by the Memorial in the 1970s. During the First World War, 10 Australian artists were appointed under the official war art scheme for typically 3-month periods with honorary commissions as officers within the Australian Imperial Force. In 1917, established illustrator and cartoonist Will Dyson was the first, a credit to his insistence for the formation of the scheme, and focused on the everyday lives and experiences of Australians on the Western Front, mostly works on paper, with only 10 paintings as part of his commission produced after the war. They carried his distinctive satirical style, but this was not common in the conservative approach of the majority of the World War's commissioned art. For most artists, commissions included pencil or oil sketches and preliminary drawings made in the field, worked up to watercolour, gouache and oil paintings, portraits, as requested, and larger studio canvases. Some artists were purely appointed for portraiture, almost always traditional oil on canvas, and painted in the studio, either overseas or in Australia, generally in the years after the war. This included established portrait artists John Longstaff and James Quinn, and some outside of the scheme such as George Coates. Senior or significant personnel were selected by the military for commissions. Non-commissioned artists such as Henry Woolcott, who served as a private at the 3rd Australian Hospital in France alongside Arthur Streeton, portrayed regular, unidentified figures. There are a significant number of very large studio canvases in the First World War collection. Septimus Power, known for his heroic portrayal of horses in battle, and George Lambert's iconic Anzac the Landing and other large-scale detailed battle scenes painted in the studio taking 2 years to complete. On the other extreme, Lambert also made a large number of small wood panel paintings rapidly executed on the spot in Palestine, and these are some of my favourite works in the whole collection. Whilst the Memorial supplied artists with materials, Lambert was resourceful with several small cigar box lids, and this resourcefulness is present in the collection throughout the years, particularly in the Second World War, where it was no surprise that war times led to material supply issues. For the most part, the paintings from the First and Second World War are traditional in supplied materials, technique and composition. With artists travelling to war fronts, small solid supports were used out in the field for ease of portability, predominantly canvas board, plywood, hardboard or wood panels. Stretched canvas was commonly chosen for later studio works completed both in London and back home in Australia. Others preferred to produce works on paper. Arthur Streeton's commission for the Memorial consisted of over 50 watercolours and sketches, but only one painting, a large studio canvas, was acquired as part of that commission. 14 Streeton paintings now held in the collection have been purchased throughout the decades since, including 2 other large-scale battle scene landscapes. One of the most iconic and valuable paintings from this era belongs to Australian painter Will Longstaff, cousin of portraitist John previously mentioned. His haunting post-war commemorative painting Menengate at Midnight was not part of his commission for the Memorial. A second from the series, Immortal Shrine, is also held in the collection. Both, with sacrifice and loss front and centre, were separately donated in 1943. Will Longstaff had been one of 5 artists already serving with the Australian Army in the First World War who were selected to be attached to the War Records section, also considered official war artists. Here, 3 of the 5 artists are pictured in the St John's Wood studio in London. Note the kangaroos painted on the light shade. George Benson created iconic works during this period. Frederick McCubbin's son Louis, who painted many panoramic landscapes, was also commissioned back in Melbourne to paint the original small and large diorama backdrops, and a series of paintings to accompany smaller dioramas in 1920s and 30s. Although there were no female official war artists in the First World War, they are present from this period in a very small volume. Tasmanian artist Florence Rodway was commissioned by the Memorial outside of the scheme to make 3 portraits in the early 1920s. Evelyn Chapman had been the first female artist to travel on her own accord to the Western Front after the conclusion of the war, but her oil and tempera paintings on felt paper depicting ruins were not part of the Memorial's collection until 7 were purchased in 1977. Dora Meeson, despite being recommended by Arthur Streeton, was never commissioned as an official war artist in her own right, but contributed to the commission of General William Bridges and his staff in Egypt, with her husband artist George Coates previously mentioned. The memorial had purchased one of her paintings in 1921. Hilda Rix-Nicholas had painted a mother of France depicting her grieving neighbour in 1914, which was purchased after the war. A second work, A Man, offered at the same time but initially dismissed as being too intimate, was eventually purchased in 1978. It and many other acquisitions occurred in the 1970s, a time period which brought major changes to the memorial, both with building extensions and the engagement of museum professionals to care for these works. It was in the 1970s that the memorial recognised the need to acquire more independently produced work reflecting on war. The First World War and Anzac legend have been returned to as themes over the years, well illustrated by our extensive collection of Sidney Nolan Gallipoli series artworks, painted between the 1950s and 70s. Nolan had been unsuccessful in his application to become an official war artist in the Second World War due to the institution's preference for realism at the time. But eventually the memorial approached Nolan to request the acquisition of some of his Gallipoli series, and he ended up donating all the artworks from this series that he still had in his own collection, in memory of his brother, over 230 works on paper and 20 large paintings. The occurrence of the Second World War saw a larger number of over 35 official war artists, including 3 women. Appointments were longer, often over years, and leading to larger volumes of works. The well-respected academic style of South Australian artist Ivor Hill, already serving the AIF, led him to be the first official war artist appointed for the Second World War. He created around 70 paintings and almost 400 works on paper, travelling with the army to Egypt and Libya, returned home to work on studio paintings, and then redeployed to New Guinea. His long relationship with the War Memorial continued through the Korean War and into the 1960s, where he was commissioned to paint further large works depicting Second World War battles. Fellow Conservative and renowned portrait artist William Dargie contributed over 200 paintings to the collection, mostly depicting scenes from his time spent in the Mediterranean, India, New Guinea and Australia, but also a large number of portraits, including these, for which he was awarded the Archibald Prize. Portraits have always been a high priority for the collection, and to this day a portrait of every Victoria Cross recipient is commissioned. Colin Colohan worked quickly in the field in the UK and Europe, which allowed him to work directly in oil instead of doing preliminary sketches. He is one of the few artists whose 80 oil paintings far outnumber works on paper from commission. After the fall of Singapore in February 1942, official war artist Murray Griffin became a prisoner of war in Changi prison camp along with 15,000 other Australians, leading to a first-hand pictorial account and record of the experience. Materials were hard to come by, and he recalled using plywood from buildings and 2 sheets of masonite attached to a ceiling of British officer quarters, which he retrieved with great difficulty. Several of his paintings still contain the text transfer from the newspaper they were wrapped in. Sali Herman's 26 commissioned paintings from New Guinea, and 3 acquired since, carry his distinctive style, including the use of textured grounds. His appointment, along with other modern artists such as Murray Griffin and Sybil Craig, was in response to a call from the Australian artistic community to reflect contemporary artistic trends. There were also lesser-known artists who contributed sizable commissions. Frank Norton documented Navy and Air Force operations in the Mediterranean and the Pacific, with his Second World War commission totalling approximately 150 paintings. Dennis Adams depicted all 3 services in over 200 paintings from Australia, the UK, Italy and the Pacific, later commissioned in the 1960s to produce 3 very large canvas scenes from his studio. The Second World War saw the first female official war artist appointed when South Australian artist Nora Hyson was assigned to record the activities of nurses in New Guinea. It was followed by Stella Bowen, revered for her group portraits in the UK. Craig, commissioned to depict activities at the home front entirely in Melbourne. There is a presentation in the 3rd week of this forum by Luella Reynolds on her master's thesis research last year on the works of these 3 women artists. Present to a degree in the First World War also, commissions in Second World War really sought to cover both the experience of soldiers in battle as well as the more routine subject matter, such as service people at rest or industry in wartime, including the home front in Australia. William Dobell, when initially approached by the memorial, was unavailable, busy with private commissions, but eventually enlisted with the Civil Construction Corps, an organised labour force of men used to provide wartime infrastructure in Australia. He was commissioned by the Allied Works Council to record their activities. 9 of the paintings he made at that time were then presented to the memorial. The Allied Works Council also commissioned artist Herbert McClintock, who worked at the Sydney Graving Dock in 1943. Also depicting industry on the home front, Dora Hawthorne independently produced a 40-work series titled Factory Folk while working at the Lithgow Small Arms Factory in the Blue Mountains. Between 1942 and 45, she worked the gruelling night shift applying precision gauges to components of the Bren gun. 4 paintings from this series have been progressively purchased for the Memorials collection. Despite the much larger number of official war artists, the number of artists represented has been further expanded over the years, with some prominent artists acquired since. We hold just 1 or 2 of their paintings. This has added to an increase in diversity of the Second World War collection, which was showcased in our recent travelling exhibition of modernist artworks, Reality in Flames. Adding a richness integral to Australian identity, an increase in immigration during the mid-20th century further expanded the Australian experience. The largest contribution to our collection in this regard has come from Gina Sanazic, who came to Australia as a refugee from Croatia in the 1950s. At age 70, she took up painting, depicting her lived stories of survival, hardship, resistance and migration in the Second World War. The Memorial was able to acquire 21 of these works shortly before her death last year. The Memorials collection has inevitably drawn from the surrounding wider Australian art industry over the years, but particularly with the large artworks and paper component, the official war art scheme had itself contributed an important body of work to Australian art in the first half of the 20th century.
5 years on from the Second World War, Australia's involvement in the Korean War saw the reappointment of Ivor Hill and Frank Norton as the only 2 artists sent to document and record this conflict, a dramatic decrease when compared with the 35 assigned to the Second World War. Similarly, the Vietnam War also saw just 2 artists sent. Ken McFadyen and Bruce Fletcher left for Vietnam in 1967, 2 years after the war began. The delay attributed to the introduced requirement for the artists to undertake lengthy jungle warfare training and operate as active soldiers if required. The increasing unpopularity of the Vietnam War also recognised as a factor. The artists followed a similar convention to those preceding in the First and Second World Wars. Historical accuracy and factual detail was valued and indeed stipulated to varying degrees in official appointments of this and earlier periods. While the majority of the paintings were created in military settings, each of the artists received later commissions for large-scale studio works or portraits related to their postings on return to Australia. The period following the Vietnam War is punctuated by a 30-year lapse in activity of the official war artist scheme. During this time, a number of significant artists were collected whose work reflected on earlier periods of conflict and the effects of war more broadly. The artist and Second World War veteran Clifton Pugh responded to various conflicts addressing First and Second World War subjects, as well as producing a large oil and enamel painting on board in 1966, which remains a confronting image and reflects the artist's attitude towards the escalation of the Vietnam War. We hold 7 paintings acquired in the late 90s to early 2000s that incorporate mixed media elements, with feathers featured on 3 paintings and a long strand of rusty barbed wire featured on 1. Noel Counihan is another artist whose social realist paintings also represent a dissonant voice opposing the Vietnam War and conscription. The 2 paintings of this period were painted in the mid-1960s. An early artwork by Ian Howard, created in 1970, is a life-size wax rubbing of the M11 3A1 armoured personnel carrier used throughout the Vietnam War. 3 paintings were recently acquired by the AWM, culminating in a 31-metre artwork of the Orion aircraft, which Alana and I had the pleasure of condition reporting last year. There remained a strong representation of tradition and realism in paintings acquired during the decades following. As we move into the 1990s and beyond, we see a continuing broadening of artistic styles, subject matter and voices actively sought by the Memorial. Gordon Bennett's painting, Psychotopographical Landscape, Inversion, painted in 1990 and purchased in 2003, marks an early acquisition of contemporary Indigenous artworks. It was one of 14 paintings selected for our 2016 exhibition for Country for Nation. This exhibition also included the only bark painting in our collection, which was painted in 1991 by Paddy Fordham Wainburanga, and represents the more traditional media of ochres on bark. In 1999, the official War Artist Scheme was reactivated and revised to include more military operations, with significant changes introduced giving greater freedom to the artist to record and interpret Australian military experience according to their own creative ideas and individual style. Furthermore, the artists selected reflect a shift towards those with a higher profile in the Australian contemporary art scene, and we see a broadening in the diversity of media and practice being deliberately chosen by the memorial. 3 official war artists were sent to cover peacekeeping missions in East Timor. Rika Moore and Wendy Sharp were appointed in 1999, and John Catapan followed nearly a decade later, in 2008. Each share a preference for photography and creating works on paper in the field, which could then be used to produce oil paintings back in Australia. Whilst this is no doubt a shift in the working practices of these artists, it is perhaps also a reflection of the often shorter timeframes given to artists embedded within the military settings nowadays. It should be noted that whilst the memorial scheme appoints and administers the official war artists, it hinges on the cooperation of the Australian Defence Force, who provide access to military zones out of bounds to civilians and the media, while also providing logistical support through the transport and accommodation of artists during their commission. In 2002, the artist Peter Churcher is appointed to represent the first of 5 official war artists to be sent to document Middle Eastern operations. He continued the tradition of painting in the field on board the HMAS Canimbla and Adelaide, as well as spending time with the RAAF on the island base of Diego Garcia. The vast majority of the 55 figurative oil paintings executed on small, often consistently sized hardboard supports. Lewis Miller and the collaborative artists Charles Green and Lyndall Brown followed on as the next artists sent to various military bases in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003 and 2007 respectively. Sean Gladwell and Ben Quilty were both sent to Afghanistan, Gladwell in 2009 and Quilty in 2011. In 2012, Tony Albert became the first Aboriginal Australian official war artist engaged to cover the activities of the Army's Regional Surveillance Force based in Northern Australia, with Alec Tapodi following in 2016. Albert produced primarily works on paper and photographic prints during his commission. However, he subsequently donated 4 paintings through the Australian Government Cultural Gifts Program, and the painting shown here was purchased in 2013. This painting speaks to the range of supports and mediums we are seeing coming into the collection. The artist uses a repurposed velvet support with commercial print and overlaid with acrylic paint. It is perhaps an interesting counterpoint to the more familiar artist's use of repurposed supports based on necessity or shortage of materials during wartime, and the resulting significance that the support imparts to the meaning of the artwork. Further works of note regarding support choice include a collaboration between Catapan and Green and Brown. Subsequent to their official commission, the artist produced 2 paintings utilising Duraclear, a polyester-based film with digital print as the support. Christopher Langton's work Hide and Seek incorporates a complex combination of computer-generated printed image, stencil and painting onto the reverse of a PVC support, which is then mounted to canvas. In 2014, the artist Imance Tillers was selected to provide a painting on which a tapestry was to be based, as a commemorative response to the First World War centenary. The artist created a signature panelled artwork with the imagery appropriated and transformed into a different media entirely by the Australian Tapestry Workshop. The works reflect on mortality, loss, time and remembrance, ideas which speak to the memorial's art collection more broadly.
As Janet mentioned previously in her presentation, the Australian War Memorial operates the official war art scheme, where artists explore visual and conceptual aspects of war that are often absent in official histories or other reporting. Ben Quilty deployed as an official war artist to Afghanistan in 2011. He spent 3 weeks observing activities and talking to Australians about their experiences. The work that he produced on return to Australia were born from these conversations. Quilty asked the soldiers when he was in Afghanistan to pose for him by facing the sun with their eyes closed, then opening them and staring into the blinding light, at which point he took their photograph. He explained, "To me, this symbolises what they're facing, something immense, overwhelming." On return to Australia, Quilty painted portraits from these photographs. The image on the left is from this series. After painting several portraits, Quilty found that they failed to capture the experience of talking with the soldiers, and his reliance on photographs was limiting his ability to articulate their emotions. Quilty decided to create portraits from live sittings instead, so he asked some of the soldiers he'd met to come to his studio. When they arrived, Quilty suggested that they sit for their portraits naked. He wasn't interested in creating traditional heroic male nudes. Instead, he wanted to capture the physicality and presence of these men and women without their protective layers of uniform and body armour. Speaking about the portrait of Lance Corporal M, which you can see on the right, Quilty said, "I wanted this soldier to be naked, showing not only his physical strength, but also the frailty of human skin and the darkness of the emotional weight of war." The Napier Waller Art Prize was initiated by the Memorial and external partners in 2018 and is open to current and former members of the Australian Defence Force. The prize promotes creative practice amongst service personnel and shares their stories and talent with a wider audience. The Napier Waller Art Prize also provides an opportunity for the Memorial to collect artwork made by Australian soldiers, aviators, sailors and veterans about their service. These works add to our unique collection of soldier art. These soldier art paintings are some examples from our collection. Starting with the painting in the top left. Robert Cooper, or Trooper Cooper as he's known, is a veteran of the war in Afghanistan who entered this work in the 2020 Napier Waller Art Prize. The painting shows Cooper embracing an Afghan farmer after giving him his gloves to protect the old man's cold hands over winter. Kel Clark's work on the top right, also from the 2020 Napier Waller Art Prize, reflects on the nature of resilience after the artist suffered an injury. Robert Menzies' work in the bottom left was donated by the artist in 2020 and commemorates the operational history of the 103 Signal Squadron. Interestingly, the work is painted on a satellite dish brought back from Afghanistan, where it was used to pick up pay TV signals for Australian troops, and features scenes from the squadron's history, as well as their mascot, a cockatoo named Bert. On the bottom right, Sydney James Fort's portrait of an unknown woman from the Second World War was painted on aircraft linen salvaged from the wings of an abandoned aeroplane, which was the only material the artist could find at the time. Demonstrating changing curatorial values at the Memorial, the collection of Fort's soldier art paintings were initially informally held by the Conservation Department from 2003 after the art section rejected them as acquisitions. In 2011, they were recognised as valuable soldier art and formally accessioned into the National Collection. This painting was created by 19 senior male artists from the Arnangu, Pitjantjatjara, Yankutjara lands, or APY lands, commissioned by the Australian War Memorial to tell their story of defending country. The artists visited Canberra in May 2017, where they located the memorial in relation to songlines from the APY lands and acknowledged the city on Ngunnawal country as a traditional meeting place for Aboriginal people. The artists, who live in remote communities throughout the vast APY lands, came together in July 2017 to work together on this painting, which tells of the myriad and complex ways in which rock holes, trees, and the landscape are protectors of the Anangu, Pitjantjatjara, Yangkutjara way of life. Reflecting on the significance of this work for the artists and their communities, senior artist Frank Young said, "We want to remember our ancestors who have passed. We want to remember those people because we know that in other places they went to war, they come back, or they got killed fighting for country. This war memorial you fellas got, we want to do the same. Remember our people, what they did, what they fought." In a mark of respect for the significance of this painting, it is hung in pride of place at the entrance of the Australian War Memorial near the Gallipoli landing boat, and is one of the first things visitors see.
We'd like to thank the organisers of this virtual forum and acknowledge the many conservation, registration and curatorial staff who have taken care of this unique Australian collection over the years. Thank you.